Hello, beloveds. So last week, about a week and a half ago, I did a post on my Instagram page regarding Beyonce's Black is King. I did a post because I was very much in shock as to how many negative commentaries there were with some of the images that Beyonce portrayed in Black is King, and with specifically the one that I posted about was with the horns, where a lot of people believe, think, or feel that is symbolic of some demonic energy, satanic representation of some sort, which is totally not true. There's a lot of misinformation on that. And that post blew up, and there was a lot of commentary on that post. And there was a lot of people going back and forth with each other, some saying that it is demonic, others saying that it's not, and what have you. So because of that particular post, I invited a very dear friend of mine to come live with me on Instagram last week. And we went at it for 2 hours. We were very blessed with her presence on Instagram, because she offered a lot of valuable information, historical context that is provable with regards to the history of enslavement, the history of blacks, the history of Christianity, and the whole nine yards. It was very informative. It's on my Instagram page, but I decided to share it on my YouTube channel, and that's why you're seeing this video now. So this is just a little tiny introduction as to what was going on in that particular live and how that live came to be. So I hope you enjoy it. It's very informative. Everyone loved it, and I hope that you do too. Many blessings.
Tonight, I decided I had to come on tonight because evidently the post that I did last night, as you can all see, has created like a big ruckus, and it has ignited some fire in some people. There are some agreements, there are some disagreements. I mean, that's just life, the way life is. We cannot always all agree on everything, right? You know, there are topics that we will not agree on. There are topics that we will see it differently. There's topics that there are topics in which we will deem it differently because of our perception, our awareness, our upbringing, what has been instilled in us. Let us not forget that we are all a product of what has been instilled in us. But there are historical contexts, there are historical facts, there is a history that cannot be denied. So tonight's live, I have invited a very dear friend who is a professor, who is a Yoruba priestess herself, and who is someone that is very versed and knowledgeable in the topic that we will be discussing here tonight, which is the whole confusion of, with regards to the post that I did last night, in regards to my understanding of how unfair many people have been with the commentary on Beyonce's live musical of Black is King, and the misconceptions and ideas that, you know, her depiction, it could be, you know, demonic and wow, blah blah blah. And for those of you that have been seeing the commentaries in the post, you've seen a lot of heated, you know, commentaries going on there, and therefore we're going to talk a little bit about that, because we seem to forget, and we seem to not be informed, and we seem to not, you know, understand that there's history. We can have differences of opinions, but there's a history that cannot be denied. And it's only up to us to want to investigate it so that we have the right amount of knowledge to bring to the table. Because if all that we're throwing out of our mouth is just perception, and we are not even challenging our perception, that is what I call, and many spiritual healers that understand the way spirituality and humanity really works, we are limiting ourselves to not grow. We are limiting our ability to understand. We are limiting our awareness. We're just confining ourselves in a box, in the same boxes that many of our ancestors, slave masters, well, let me not even go there. Lord, I'm trying to behave. I end up not behaving anyway at night, but I'm gonna behave the best way I can. Anyway, without further ado, because let me see if she's already on. Well. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. Awesome to connect with you
Yeah,
on this
definitely.
platform, on this level. I mean, I'm very honored to connect with you here tonight.
As
Beloved
am I.
warriors, this is Miss Nzinga. And, I'm not going to tell you all what she is because that's what she's here for. She will tell you all what she is. I know she's a college professor, and I know that she has a great understanding and awareness of Yoruba traditions, but even historical context on Africa, the history, the whereabouts of where certain things came from and how it has all been discombobulated by our misinformed perceptions of things. So therefore, this goddess of Oya, because she is a priestess of Oya,
Epa,
Crown Oya,
hey!
okay?
Epa, hey, Yansa!
She's going to lay it down for us. I
Let's
will
get
take
into it,
I
bro.
will take a little of a back seat because I know I also myself I have a lot to learn as to the context of how things came about to be, and she's
Yeah.
the best person that I know that can elaborate and help us understand. So first, let's start with a little tiny bit of your background and what you do and who
Okay.
you are today.
Okay. So my name is Nzinga, and I am a historian and an anthropologist by trade. I teach at an HBCU. I am also an Oloya for people who are not familiar with the terminology. I'm an initiate of Oloya of 21 years. Um, and I was born into a Creolized tradition. So the Orisha tradition and the Yoruba tradition was not completely foreign to me, even when I first started practicing. It's
Okay.
ancestral in my lineage. And I was led back to the tradition by Ifa to go and do my initiation in Yoruba land. So my lineage is Yoruba land rather than Lukumi.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there are a lot of new people coming in, and there's so much information that a lot of people just don't know about. So for those who are not aware, there are a lot of Yoruba influenced traditions here in the Western Hemisphere, right? So obviously the one that most people are familiar with is the Lukumi tradition. Then we have Candomblé in Brazil. We have the Nago Pantheon when in Haiti. We also have Yoruba tradition in Trinidad, in Grenada, in Puerto Rico. So we have many different diaspora Yoruba related traditions. And so people are practicing in this whole range of traditions. I like to refer to them as denominations, basically,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And my denomination just happens to be in Yoruba land. That's where I received my initiations. So
Okay. Awesomeness. And currently you teach anthropology.
yes, I'm a doctor of anthropology, cultural
Aw-
anthropology. That is
aw-
my job.
Awesomeness. Welcome. I'm so happy that we're connecting here tonight.
Yeah, me too.
So let's dive a little because you saw the post that I did last night, and
Yes,
you've seen today how
yes.
controversial it has seemed to have been, not just on my
Listen,
platform, but evidently it's become controversial in many different other platforms as well.
right.
Um, I just one of the many ones that is talking about it, and you've seen a little. I think you read a little of the opinions because that's what they
Yep.
are, opinions, right? There's a difference between, and this is what I've learned over the years, and this is what I've learned even more now, that there's a great major difference between an opinion, a fact,
Yes.
and a truth.
people have it all mixed up. It's not the same thing. An
It's
opinion
not.
is not universal. A fact is not universal. A
No.
certain truth is individual, as
Right.
well. So from your understanding, from your perspective, from your education on the matter, where do you believe this whole concept of devil, demonic, satanic views of Beyonce's perception of that picture that I posted that
Yeah.
came up in her latest Black is King? Where
Yeah.
do you think that confusion comes from? That everything that looks African or everything that is portrayed with these horns, is symbolic of Satan and is demonic.
Okay. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Christianity itself, or let's actually start with Judaism,
Okay.
where the contemporary depiction of Satan did not exist in the early days of Judaism, nor did it exist in the early days of Christianity. It wasn't until, thousands of years after Judaism had been in existence, and then hundreds of years after Christianity had been in existence, that this idea of Satan based on this horned deity really began to gel and to become a part of church doctrine.
Okay.
So even though it exists now, it wasn't always even a part of the Christian church.
Okay.
Okay. So there's that, obviously. And then with the exploration of Africa and the Middle East, and then the enslavement of African people,
Okay.
and then the colonization of African people, we got a deliberate and intentional demonization of African traditions that was intentionally created to facilitate the enslavement of African people and the colonization of Africa, which demonized African traditions in an effort to strip African peoples of their identities to facilitate the process of enslaving and conquering them. So this is something that, one of my parents is African. So when you talk to old African people, they talk about, when the colonizers came to West Africa and literally were burning people's shrines. They were going into ancestral shrines, breaking things, burning them down, and condemning the ancestral practices of people. And two things happen. One, on the one hand, you have people who become, this is terror, right? Like, this is terrorism. Like, if we think about just like a very strict definition of what terrorism is. So you have people who become terrorized because force is being used against them to kind of root out their traditions.
Okay.
On the other hand, you get the development of this kind of like Stockholm syndrome, where people begin to, excuse me, associate their affiliation with as a hallmark of progress and modernization. And so they no longer need Europeans to come in and destroy shrines, because we will destroy them ourselves, right? So now you get Black people breaking shrines, look at what's happening in Brazil, right? We have African descendants and people of color literally killing candomblé priests and priestesses and destroying terreiros, right? Because we have been conditioned for centuries to despise our traditions and to believe that they're atavistic. Atavistic means backwards, like referring to only to the past. So we've been conditioned to believe that they're atavistic, that they're backwards, that they're primitive, and on the worst end of the spectrum, that they're evil. So when you combine what Europeans themselves had been colonized, so let's talk about that, Let's talk about the fact that Europeans themselves were colonized, because a lot of people don't
Ashe.
understand
Bring
that
it.
Europeans were colonized and Christianized by Christians. Europe
Sure.
practiced earth-based pagan religions before the Romans terrorized and colonized and conquered them. So,
Yes, ma'am.
once we have Europeans who have also had their earth-based traditions ripped away from them and had that replaced with Christianity, now they are simply passing on the same sickness to us, because they now have an agenda of conquering Africa and Africans and enslaving them. And so when they look at our symbolism, because they are limited in their understanding of history and of their perception, like I said on my comments, you don't possess the whole alphabet, but you're trying to tell us how to spell words. You got to remember, when you, first of all, for
I'm
people
getting
who
goosebumps here. I'm getting goosebumps here.
For people who want to know, there is a documentary on YouTube by the BBC right now. If you Google BBC documentary History of the Devil, it's an
Okay.
hour-long explanation of where the Christian concept of the devil. So if y'all don't believe me, go look at the documentary and then find the books. But
Okay.
outside of that, Africa is the origin of humanity. Okay?
Ashe.
Africa is the origin of humanity. The first human beings that walked the earth in Africa. And I know there are going to be a lot of people who are pissed off and who are whatever. I don't care. The fact of the matter is, the archaeological evidence is there that substantiates the fact that the first human beings on earth walked in Africa. What are the dates? Okay, so we have Homo erectus dating to about 2.2 million years, 2.2 to 2.4 million years ago, up until 27,000 years ago. Then we've got, if we want to talk about Homo sapiens sapiens, which is our species, the date has been pushed back because there have been new finds. So now we're looking at something that the dates are saying that the first fully human, exactly like us, beings that walked in Africa were walking around 300,000 years ago. Okay? So let's just do some quick math, all right? This is the thought experiment that I do with my students, okay? So what do you know about the dates of the slave trade? How long did the slave trade last? Let's go big, right? Let's say the slave trade starts in 1555 with the first Africans being brought to Brazil, and then doesn't end legally until 1888. So let's call it, what is that? 1555 to 1888. That's what, 333 years. Okay. So let's look at 333 years, and let's divide 333 years by 300,000, right? Let's do that. So I'm doing this on my calculator right now. And do you know what that number is? 0.001. So that means not a tenth of African history, not 100th of African history, but 1,000th of 1% of our history is within the context of slavery. So what I like to ask my students is, what the hell do you think Black people were doing in Africa for 300,000 years? What do you think they were doing? Swinging from trees, living in huts, beating on their chests and saying ooga booga? Like, what do you really think they were doing? If we're talking about beings who had the full and exact intellectual capacity that you and I have, you know how human beings are. We see human beings, so we know what they're like, right? They're curious. They're going to explore. They're going to ask questions. They're going to experiment. You know what I'm saying? They're going to find out about their environment.
Exactly.
If we have Africans who are exactly like us walking around in Africa for 300,000 years, you cannot tell me that we ain't figured nothing out.
That's it. Ashe, ashe, ashe.
Because this country is only what, a little over 250 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to think about the progress that has been achieved in any country that you want to think of, the United States, Germany, France, Basuto land, Mongolia, China, India, if you want to think about what has happened in the amount of time that we know about that history, and then compare it to 300,000 years.
Ashe. Ashe.
We don't even have the intellectual capacity to perceive of like what 300,000 years looks like. You know, like we got parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. But you know what I'm saying? Like, but even that sometimes doesn't even span 150 years.
Exactly.
So when we're talking about 300,000 years, we're talking about deep human experience.
Exactly.
So let me bring it up a little bit further.
Deep human experiences with defined lifestyles, customs.
Yes.
The whole 9 yards. That's the point.
Whole 9 yards. That human beings can only exist within the context of societies. That is what we do. We live in societies. And there are all different kinds of societies.
Of course.
Right? So as long as we are living in commune with each other, we have created a society. What do you have in a society? You have structures, you have rules, you have ceremonies, you have rituals, you have customs, you have certain ways you do things. You got certain kinds of food you like, certain kind of beads you want to wear, certain times of the year. You know, like every society has these things, and we call these things culture.
Exactly.
Human beings cannot exist without culture.
Exactly.
So that means that African culture as a whole, and then however it broke out over that space of time, has existed for 300,000 years, which means, and I'm only using the 300,000 year date because older species of human, we could debate about that. You know, I'll debate about that with other anthropologists as to what their intellectual capacity is. I don't want to get all jargony or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But let's just stick with the fully Homo sapiens sapiens at 300,000 years. So we're talking about people who had language. They had foodways, they had music, they had homes, they had children, they had families, they, you know, moved from one place to another. They introduced themselves to different people. They created new tools. They, you know what I'm saying? Like this is what was going on for 300,000 years.
And they had their own established way of communicating with their God, with the most God, with their spirituality in whichever manner it was defined within each, I don't want to call it tribe, but within each, you know, community, you know, within their culture, already defined and established.
Absolutely. So human beings have been trying to understand and trying to interact with, the Haitians call it les mystères, right? In the Yoruba tradition, we say awo, right? The mystery, the secret, the thing that is unknowable. We have been trying to understand that since we got here. And so that means that we have long established our own ways and means of interfacing with the divine, with whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
And so as it stands, there is archaeological evidence of people creating art that's 70, 80,000 years. There are rock paintings. You can go to the desert in the Sahara and go and see rock art that African people created 70, 80,000 years ago.
That's true.
So if people are creating art, what do you create art for? Can you eat it? No. You know what I'm saying? Can you wear it? Not necessarily. Like, what are you creating rock art for? There's something happening at the symbolic level if you're creating rock art.
And correct me or educate me, actually, because, you know, this is where I like to learn. I would deduce that they're creating art for historical context too, to leave the imprint of their own history recorded in their art.
Yes,
because art is a story. Art is a story. Art is how you express who you are, what you've learned, what you've been exposed to, what you feel, everything about a human being.
Absolutely. However, when you think of like an African, right? And we think about what we do in our traditions when it comes to prayer and interfacing with the divine, what do? We physicalize our prayers, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why in the Lukumi tradition and in the Yoruba tradition, we have adimu, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have
That's it.
food that we prepare, or we may make objects that are beautiful to offer to our spirits.
Okay.
So there is conjecture in the anthropological world that this rock art may have been sacred.
That's it.
And it may have been a way, because it's always animals, and we know ancient people hunted. So this rock art may have been a part of ritual to ensure a better hunt. Or to maybe represent the spirits of the animals that were killed because they respected them. Or, they might have played some symbolic role in, ritual or in spirituality. Because outside of pure aesthetics, there's nothing practical about making rock art. You know what I'm saying? Like
Exactly.
you're doing it for some symbolic reason. What that symbolic reason is, we'll probably never know, but it's symbolic because it doesn't feed you. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't fulfill anything on Maslow's hierarchy. So we have rock art, but what we also have, and here's another 2 documentaries that people can go and watch. One of them is called Black Mummy of the Green Sahara. And another one is called Skeletons of the Sahara. Both of these documentaries deal with what was happening in the Sahara 10,000 or more years ago. So what basically happens is the earth is a globe, right? It's a ball. And if you think about like a cylinder, like a stick going through the middle of the earth, the earth's axis tilts towards the sun every 20,000 years, and then the earth's northern axis tilts away from the sun every 20,000 years. When the earth's axis tilts towards the sun, what do you think happens to the polar caps? They melt.
They melt.
Right. The polar caps melt, and so now we have more liquid and vapor water in this closed system that is Earth, which means we have more rain, which means the Sahara is not a desert at these times. So that's why it's called the Green Sahara. And so during these time periods, you had buffalo and elephants and antelope and crocodiles and all this life that is existing across what is now the Sahara. With this tilting back and forth, you have people who are living there. So exactly, they melt, Angela RG. And so when people are living in the Sahara, one of the things that they're doing, what do we have to do? When people die, what do we got to do with them? We got to bury them. So the documentary called Skeletons of the Sahara, Bendiciones, Luna, one of the things that was found in, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the site, but they found an 8,000-year-old burial ground, basically, in the middle of the Sahara, which required some archaeological, what did I put? Spiritual. Okay, anyway. Yeah. So they dug and they basically found that there are 2 populations of people, Tenerans and Kifians, who are buried in a northern part of Niger. And they were living in what is the desert now, but it wasn't the desert when they were living there. And one of the important things that they found is that when the precession of the equinoxes, Rasa, what they found was there's a cattle complex or a cattle culture that has existed across the northern part of Africa for thousands of years. So for a long time, many cultural anthropologists, archaeologists, you're welcome, paleontologists, whatever, thought that this cattle complex only existed in eastern and southern eastern Africa, where we have like the Nuba people. If you think about South Africa and you think about those big kraals, if anybody saw Shaka Zulu, people have cows, they keep cows. So people thought that cattle culture was something that only existed in Eastern Africa. But what archaeological finds in the northern, kind of like that hump of Africa, have unveiled is that there was a cattle culture from Egypt all the way across to Mali. Because, and why do we know this? Because they were drawing cows on the rocks. The bighorn, those cows, right?
Yep.
So there's a cattle culture that exists all the way across Africa. If you go online, go and look at Intori. Intori is spelled Intori, I think. Let me make sure. Intori is spelled Intore. This is dance from Rwanda. And what you will see is people holding their arms up like this because the cow is sacred to them traditionally. And the extension of the arms is symbolic of those huge cow horns that were sacred to them, not only spiritually sacred, but they were also financially sacred, economically sacred.
Exactly.
They were a way to hold on to wealth in their families, etc.
Exactly.
And you see this in the dance and the extension of the arms. And so also archaeologists and anthropologists and Egyptologists also, you know how people like to try to take Egypt out of Africa. You know what I'm saying? Like, people like to act like Egypt ain't a part of Africa. And so for the longest time, people were like, oh my God, like, where do they get these ideas from? Where do they get these ideas from? Like, Egypt is, what do they like to say? Egypt is an anomaly. It is an exception in Africa. No, the hell it's not. When we talk about the goddess Hathor, and I've seen these images across Facebook and Instagram, and everybody's talking about these images. When we talk about the goddess Hathor, or Het Heru, which means house of Heru. Hathor was a cow goddess. In the early depictions of cows in this ancient time, 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, they had depictions just of a cow, not of a woman. But we see over the change, over the dynasties of Egypt, that this image becomes anthropomorphized. It becomes more human-like. And so instead of just an actual cow, now we have a woman that is represented with the solar disc in the middle of the horns. And that is the depiction. That is what Beyonce is portraying, or one of the symbols that Beyonce is portraying in this image that people are sharing all over social media. Has nothing to do with the devil. It has nothing to do with goats. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It has nothing to do with Judaism or Islam. These concepts and ideas predate Abrahamic religions. As I said in my post, if you Google the what do you call this? The swastika. You will see that image comes out of India. It is a sacred symbol from India. But nobody accuses Indians of being Nazis. Why? Because it's their symbol. They created the symbol before the Nazis knew anything about it. So why is it that we have symbols that predate these Abrahamic concepts, and people take liberties to point fingers at us and assign symbolism to us that has absolutely nothing to do with us? It has nothing to do with us. Cows were sacred to us long before the Romans decided that the devil was going to be associated with goats.
Exactly. That
symbol is a new symbol. It is new. It is something that didn't happen until probably, I want to say mid-1500s, if I'm not, 1500s. This is new.
Yeah, medieval. Yeah.
So,
and I believe that there's also history of, I don't know if you agree with this, but from the Pan, the Greek mythology figure, the Greek mythology figure, the pastoral god of Arcadia, that had a goat-like leg, and horns in the head, and from there the whole connection with Satan, became that image, became that image.
Absolutely. But you have to think about, most people forget, like I said earlier, that Europeans were colonized. This is one thing that I can't stand about white supremacists, okay?
You know,
Because
let
white
me tell you
supremacists,
something, and sorry to cut you off. You know,
that's okay, no problem.
I am loving this conversation because you are not just also, because I'm learning too, folks, and I have no shame in saying that I'm learning too as well, but you are also reminding me of things that I might have learned a while back and I totally forgot, like that part, the
Yeah.
colonization of the European. I had totally,
Yes.
I knew this from back in college, but I had totally forgotten about that.
Yes.
So thank you for that, because that
Yes.
is true.
That is the truth.
Historical,
White
not
supremacists,
opinion. It's historical.
no, this is a fact, okay? So this is one thing I can't stand about white supremacists, because they're like, oh, white people conquered the world. And I'm like, okay, so which white people are you talking about? Are you talking about the white people who conquered the other white people, or the white people who got conquered by the other white people? Because they were losers too, Richard Spencer. You feel me? So when you think about what happened after Constantine decided to make Christianity the state religion, and you know, when Rome has already taken over a huge part of Europe, and then slowly but surely, because a lot of people don't understand that Roman Catholicism was the first Christianity to be propagated outside of, the Middle East, right? So when, for example, go and look it up, the Irish were conquered and they were forced to leave behind their earth-based tradition and exchange it for Christianity. The Vikings, they were forced to give up their traditions. All of the pagan earth-based traditions that existed in Europe were wiped out. They were wiped out. Traditions that venerated the earth, traditions that also had a less oppressive view of women, they were all wiped out by Christianity in Europe. So this idea that this is something that has only happened outside of Europe is just not the truth.
True. It's not true.
It's just not the truth. And as Christianity was making its way into these different places, it took a lot for the Catholic Church to uproot these ideas. So, you'll get on these, you'll see these like different posts and stuff about people like, oh, Easter it's a pagan holiday. Christmas is a pagan holiday. The reason why these holidays are pagan is because the Catholic Church had to figure out a way to make Catholicism more palatable to European pagans. So instead of taking, because we don't know if when Jesus was born, if he was born, we don't know. But instead of just saying, let's try to figure out.
It sure as hell wasn't December 24th.
It was not December 24th. But what they did was they took that holiday that people were already celebrating as the equinox, and it was also a part of Saturnalia, and they said, people are already celebrating this, and since we won't be able to rip them away from their tradition, we're just going to co-opt their tradition and overlay this Christian holiday on top of this pagan holiday to get the people to buy in. The same thing happened with Easter. People would not stop celebrating the spring equinox. So they slapped Easter right around the same time of the year so that they could get people to buy into Christian holidays. So even the Europeans who were conquered, you had to pry their traditions from their hands. And when you think about the witch burnings and you think about, how doulas and midwives were persecuted, it was because their herbal knowledge made them a threat to the church.
Exactly.
And the church was a patriarchal institution that had no room for female leadership. So they viewed these women as a threat, and they went on a methodical mission to erase them and erase their practices. Exactly. And so then once we get Northern and Western Europe fully Christianized, and then we get hit with the Black Death, which takes us into I'm sorry, it gets Christianized, and then we move into the Dark Ages. That happens as a result of the fall of the Roman Empire. Then we get hit with the Black Death. Then we have most Europeans who are existing within the context of feudalism. For all intents, they're serfs. So they're working on, rich people's land, living off of whatever white, rich, wealthy, what do you call these people? Royals give them. Yeah. So the people end up being squeezed between the church and the royal class. And so, the church is in charge, and then the church is at war in the Middle East, and they're saying, oh, well, we have to get Jerusalem back. And so now we're in the Crusades. People don't like to talk about that terrorism that happened. But now we're in the Crusades. And so Europeans are sending soldiers over to the Middle East to war with Muslims to pry Jerusalem from their hands. And once that happens, now you get this influx of information back into Europe that had been lost during the Dark Ages. It's coming from the Arabs. Where did they get it from? They got it from the Romans, who got it from the Greeks, who got it from the Egyptians.
That's sure.
The math, the science, the
art, everything.
The art, the poetry, all of that stuff, but also just the cartography, the study of the stars, all of that, astronomy, that's what I was trying to say. The astronomy, all of that starts filtering back into Europe. Now we have what we call the Renaissance. It's the rebirth. It's the rebirth of information, because people were being oppressed in Europe during the Dark Ages. So the average European peasant couldn't read or write. And so they were forced to believe whatever the ruling class and the church said. And the church was saying, if you don't pay your tithes, you're going to hell. If you don't do this, you're going to hell. If you don't do that, you're going to hell. And the ruling class is saying, if you hunt on my land, I'm going to kill you. If you take my whatever, I'm going to kill you. You know what I'm saying? Yep. And so it's this rebirth of information into Europe that ends up blowing European minds. And with these tools that they get, the math, the science, the astronomy, all of this stuff, they're like, oh shit, we can build boats. Now we can make maps. With maps, now we're in the European age of exploration. Once they get on once they start that age of exploration and they start getting on boats and running around the world, we're in the mercantilist age. What is mercantilism? Mercantilism is the economic precursor to capitalism. And so the money that funded the Renaissance and that funded the age of exploration was money that came out of Africa. That was Africa's gold. Why? Because they were trading with Africans. They had never stopped trading with Africans. When you look at these people, when you look at these movies, when you look at 300, or you look at these movies that are based in these different time periods, and they got lions and tigers and bears. Where do you think they got the lions from that were in the Colosseum? Where do you think they got the pygmies from? Where do you think they got the Nubian warriors from? They got them from Africa. They were trading with Africa the whole time. African gold funded the Renaissance.
Of course.
And then these people turned around and they figured out that they wanted to start enslaving Black people because they wanted to grow sugar, they wanted to grow indigo, they wanted to grow rice, they wanted to grow whatever. And there's another documentary. What is the name of this documentary? It's gonna come to me. Geez. I can't think of it right now. I believe it was an Al Jazeera special called Slavery Roots. That's what it was called. It was called Slavery Roots. It was done by Al Jazeera, and it traced the beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade, which most people don't know, that started in Sao Tome and Principe in West Africa. This is where they got the template for the plantation system, and they did it with cocoa. And then once they figured out they could do it with cocoa, they exported that system to Brazil, to Cuba, to Haiti with
Mm-hmm.
sugar. Because you got to remember, when Christopher Columbus got on his boat, he did not get on his boat with just like some beers and his buddies. Christopher Columbus got on his boat and he had plants. He had plants because he was trying to figure out what could be grown in this new place that he was going to. And one of the plants that he got on there that he had with him was sugarcane. And once they figured out that sugarcane could grow here in the Western Hemisphere in the tropical environments, that was the death knell for you and me. Because sugar is very labor intensive, and they had to figure out how they were going to get people to farm the sugar and who they were going to get to farm the sugar. And this becomes the impetus for the transatlantic slave trade. Sugar is a huge, 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 huge deal. Sugar was like in the 15th, 16th, and 1700s what oil is now.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a place like Haiti. Think about how small the island of Hispaniola is, right? At one point in Haiti's history, they were producing 60 to 70% of France's GDP. Can you imagine that, brother? 60 to 70% of France's GDP being generated by Black death in Haiti.
That's right.
So all of those fancy dresses and those wigs and those pastries and that perfume and all of that stuff was funded by our ancestors. It was the blood of our ancestors that created that luxury for those people.
Ashe.
So when we talk about the fact that the Western world owes us, it is not metaphorical. It is not symbolic. It is not
sitting in your feelings
hyperbole.
and
yeah, it's not feelings. It's not hyperbole. It's real money. It's real debt. When we talk about a place like Haiti, right? We're talking about people who had a life expectancy of under 30 years old. Why? Because they were literally working people to death.
That's true.
They were working people to death. Why were they working them to death? Because it was cheaper to work Africans to death than it was to nurse them back to health to keep them on the plantations.
That's true.
And that's just one Caribbean island.
Just one.
We ain't got into Barbados. We ain't got into Brazil. We ain't got into Trinidad and Tobago. We ain't got into Puerto Rico. We ain't got into Jamaica. We ain't got into Guadeloupe. We ain't got into Martinique. We ain't got into none of those places. We ain't got into North America. We haven't gotten into Brazil. Let's not talk about what they were doing in Venezuela and what they were doing in Mexico and what they were doing in Costa Rica and what they were doing in Peru. Because all of these places have suffered from blanquismo. They have gone through and they have erased the African impact on these places because they don't want to admit to what they did and how they benefited from our blood, sweat, and tears.
That's true. They have been trying to erase the history forever. And they continue to try to erase the history forever.
They've been trying to erase it. After they benefited from our blood and our sweat and our tears, they tried to erase us from the history books. But we don't die. We multiply. And we're not going nowhere.
And not to go way off topic because this is extremely juicy. But think about how institutions such as school system got started. The whole idea of going to college, the whole idea of getting a degree.
I'm an earth sign. I'm a Taurus. I ain't got no fire. I don't have no fire in my chart. Somebody said this system must be a fire sign. It's just my. Ooh, I'm hot. This shit gets me lit.
Fire. Oh yeah, that's been fire too.
Oh my God.
That's how these textbooks, these books, got rewritten or got written in a way to just keep you dumb. To keep you dumb, basically, if you're going to put it in layman's terms, to keep you dumb.
Right.
Because you're not going to find this in a textbook. You're not going to find this in 5th grade and 6th grade or anything like that. This has
No.
all been, they continue to extract the information so it's not available for you. And you have to dig and look and do the research because the information is there. They haven't been able
It
to
is
erase
there.
it.
It is
You
there.
just have to
And this
really
is,
look
that's
for
it,
it.
Afimaye.
It's
And
not
this
going
is
to
the
come up
thing.
in the first Google search. It's just not going to come up.
It's not. And Black people had to stop saying, oh, well, they hid it from us, they whatever. Go and find it, because these people are meticulous record keepers. It is there. I want everybody to go to a website called slavevoyages.com. Slavevoyages.com. This website documents over 33,000 journeys across the Atlantic Ocean, and it accounts for 11 million Africans being taken out of Africa and brought to the Americas.
Say it again for the people in the back.
33,000 journeys across the Atlantic, accounting for 11 million people being brought out of Africa to the Americas. Slavevoyages.com. And now what they're doing, which is amazing, and I'm so grateful for this, is that, you know, the international slave trade was outlawed by the British in 1807, which means it was illegal to take people out of Africa and bring them to the Americas. So where do you think the slaves were coming from in the Americas? They were coming from slaves being, you know, reproducing, and they were also coming from the Caribbean. So now on that same site, what they're doing is they're tracing the intra-American slave trade, meaning who was being moved around when within the Americas after the international slave trade was outlawed. And it's a lot of people, a lot of families being ripped apart. A lot of people being taken from North America to the Caribbean, from the Caribbean to North America, from, you know what I'm saying? They're moving us around.
Completely being broken. Families being broken in all shapes. Kids. And if I recall correctly, they would do this, and there's probably a more professional term for this, but they were doing is they were also saying, okay, these people are in a certain age range, so we're going to keep these people here. Well, these children were just born, so we're going to take them over there because we're going to train them, basically, right, to become what we done. Then, you know, we have this manpower based on age, based on sex, based on strength, all that. To determine, to separate families.
But you got to remember that it was about money. There's another book. It's a book I want people to go out and look for called The Half Has Never Been Told. The Half Has Never Been Told. And the subtitle is Slavery in the Making of American Capitalism. This is a masterpiece work that everybody should read. And the reason why is because this author gets into the very fine details of what was required to create this system that ran off of human labor, right? So you have to I'm sorry, thank you for that, J. Cream. Slavevoyages.org. It's not slavevoyages.com. It's slavevoyages.org. Thank you for that. But The Half Has Never Been Told talks about capitalism and how the form of capitalism that we have in the United States is rooted in slavery, right? And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because slave owners and slave buyers were very specific and knowledgeable about what they were doing when they were trading human flesh. They bought and sold people according to their skill and what they could do for whatever slave owner was buying and selling them. So once
Exactly.
the international slave trade, let me say the transatlantic slave trade was you know, outlawed, they still had needs. They still had to have strong field workers for cotton and sugar. They
Mm-hmm.
still had to have wet nurses for babies. They still had, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
they had to have they still had specific tasks that they needed. And if you were, let's say, you know, you're a strong man and you're the head of your family, and somebody wants to buy you, they just sell you, and that's
Mm-hmm.
it. But your wife is still good for the slave owner's wet nurse. They kept the wife. Like it was cold mathematics and calculus. There was nothing about, oh, the human, how they feel, because they didn't see us as humans. And that's why we're still fighting to
We
be
were
seen as
animals. We were animals to them.
exactly.
We were animals. And in their eyes, those that still, which are many, countless, still hold that mindset, we are still animals to them.
Yes.
In their
Yes.
spirit, they feel that they're animals, that we are still
And to
animals
the
to them.
system, and to the system, and to the
Mm-hmm.
system. And so when you think about, like, you know, what does it take to make a slave? You know, you got to remember, and this is one thing that I love to say to my students: different groups of people around the world specialize in creating different things. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like if we look at Asia right now, different countries in Asia have cornered the market on technology. You know, parts of Europe corner different markets on certain kinds of things. I like to think about Africa as specializing in human beings. Over 300,000 years, I believe that um, we perfected society and humanity, how to be human to each other, how to love, how to have families, how to relate, how to communicate, how to support,
For
how
sure.
to deal with each other.
For sure.
And so
Actually.
when you think
Which is
about
what African traditional religions is really based about.
bingo, bingo,
That's really what ATR
and
is based
that
about. That's
exactly,
really what the Yoruba life is all about. That is
that's
really
exactly it.
not what and I'm gonna say it. I don't want to make a whole lot of people pissed, but do you think I care? You know how we
I
roll.
know you
Um
don't.
um you know it's not how even us in the diaspora, in the Lukumi tradition, we really still to this day don't really grasp what it is to live the life of Oricha, or a
Yes,
representation of Oricha, because we can live the life of Oricha, but in the representation of living the life of Oricha, as the Yoruba concept originally is based on connection to life, to humanity, to family, to son, to brother, to the whole aspect of life, to the cosmos, to Olofin, to Olorun, to everything, because that's
absolutely,
what it is. And for those of you that
absolutely.
may not even know, one of the major energies that is a contributor to all that exchange is Oya, the energy of Oya.
Hello,
Okay?
hello. Yes.
So
And so
definitely,
when you think about, like,
so many
what
things.
it would take to make a slave, when it comes to African people, our definition of ourselves traditionally, from many, many different people, and obviously I can't speak for every group of people on Africa, on the continent of Africa, but the trend in Africa is that we define ourselves by our connection to other people,
That's true.
right? We define ourselves. So this is why we have things in our languages, whether they're um, Creole or Patois languages, or whether they're languages, African languages,
Mm-hmm.
in Ebonics, or in what do they call AAVE, African American Vernacular English in the South. One of the things that, like, one of the ways that we greet each other is, "How your mama now?" When we see each other in the street, we say, "How your mama now?" Meaning, not just how are you, but how are your people? How is
Mm-hmm.
everybody? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, and you will see this kind of phenomenon in greetings around Black people everywhere. Everywhere. We do the same thing in different formats. And so when you think about the fact that we define ourselves by being connected to each other, we define ourselves by being connected to our homeland, we define ourselves by being connected to our spirits who are connected to our homelands, then it becomes clear why it was so important for Europeans to separate us from those things.
That's true. That's true. Sorry to cut you off. we got 50 seconds left before we left it. You mind coming back for a little bit?
Of course.
Okay. Let's end this. Let's save it, and we'll be back in 1 minute because it's going to cut off in 30 seconds now.